All right, I wanted to take a look at two different visions of America. Now, the first will be traditional America, 1776, Constitution, Bill of Rights, Betsy Ross, George Washington and the cherry tree, apple pie, the whole nine yards. The second, newer vision of America, the radical vision of America, would be essentially based on, let's say, the 1619 Project. So, in other words, the country's true origins or founding was in the year 1619. It's when African slaves were first brought to Virginia, and as a result, everything that has occurred in the country since then has been negative because it's been informed by the institution of slavery in some way, and therefore everyone alive today who can be connected to it via component of immutable characteristic or identity characteristic, then you either bear some responsibility or some obligation or debt is owed to you. That's the basic thumbnail of the 1619 Project. It's a very toxic idea. It's a very radical and destructive idea. It would essentially result in the dismantling of all of the institutions of America, all of the ideas and the founding principles that have undergirded its success for centuries. And all of that now is in jeopardy, and it's all because we now have essentially a cold civil war. And hopefully that doesn't ever become a hot war, but I think we've been in a cold civil war for a number of years now. And oddly, it really has very little to do with people and has much more to do with manipulation from government and media and education and a lot of other major institutions who have all kind of synced up on this same critical race theory page for some reason. And it seems to include virtually every element of our society today. It's literally infected everything. And so what is the problem? Well, it's very clear to see. One of these visions is anchored in reality and history, and the other one is anchored in pure fiction and anger and agenda. And so we've really seen coalescing of politics recently, but that's been occurring since the 1960s. What's different about it today is that the coalescing has resulted in this aggressive well poisoning. And so, in fairness, I think you could go back about 10 or 15 years, and if you recall, Ben Stein was promoting this. He had some movie that he made about it, and the idea was that they would relabel religious views as creationism, as a theory. It's a scientific theory. And it's based on the notion of intelligent design, that when you see something that clearly was made to be that way, whatever the criteria would be for that, then that is evidence of an intelligent creator. And that's a basic idea. And so the left kind of sniffed this out and said, well, you can't masquerade religion or the Bible as science, as a scientific theory, and put it into science classes. We're just not having that. And I think rightly so. I think that was the objection to make regarding that, though I'm not opposed to having the Bible in school taught as literature or an English class or something like that. That's a wholly different context, no pun intended. But if you were to have it in a science class, it simply doesn't belong there. It's not a scientific topic. But when this was broken up, gone to court, and the left was pursuing it, and somewhere along the line, I don't even think it had been decided. I think the left had uncovered, and I say the left and the right here because I honestly don't know any of the names. It's been so long. They had uncovered documentation that sort of revealed the scheme, which, by the way, if you ever have a sinister plan that you intend to hatch at some point in your life, do yourself a favor. Don't map it out on paper and then get careless and leave the paper laying around somewhere after you go enact the plan, for obvious reasons. But apparently, this eluded the enthusiasts on the right who had been pushing this notion. And so they found the documents, and they even titled it the wedge strategy. The idea being that if you could get intelligent design into the science classes, that would be the snowplow behind which you could follow with a much larger agenda, the wedge strategy. And they even titled their documentation the wedge strategy. Why would you do something so foolish? It's kind of like if you worked for a federal law enforcement agency or something, and you were going to do some surreptitious illegal operation. You wouldn't name it, like you wouldn't put a title on it officially, like Crossfire Hurricane or anything like that. It would be idiotic. So basically, it looks to me as though the left uncovered this plan and saw what they had intended to do, and then thought to themselves, my God, what a horribly sinister plan this was. Can you believe they were trying to force this agenda into schools so that they could impose the larger ideology on kids at an early age in order to just create voters before they were even old enough to? What a brilliant idea that was. What colossal fools that they got caught. How could we take the same concept and impose that in schools and make it work and get away with it? Well, they did. They found critical race theory, and they started to push that in high schools and middle schools. And I'll tell you, this is a warning. I have kids that I teach. Some of the courses I do are with dual credit students who have high school classes that they take my courses, and they also receive a college credit. So I have some classes that are that way. And so I've had exposure to kids that are approximately, some are 9th and 10th grade. And to see the amount of excitement that occurs whenever you start talking about race issues or issues of identity, let's say, it just became very confusing to me exactly what they believed and why. And so I remember in the middle of a lesson one day, I just stopped and said, let me ask you all something, an honest question. And I want you to tell me the truth. When do you think was a worse time in America for minorities? Was it in the 1950s into the Jim Crow South, or today? And they erupted in a chaotic outburst. They were appalled that I would even ask such a question, because in their minds, obviously, today is far worse. Why would you even compare it to the Jim Crow South? What, are you, a fool? Today is much worse than that ever was. And so it really caused me to just stop and take stock of what I thought I had known up to that point, or what I had come to believe, because the situation was much worse and much more dire than I had ever imagined. That is the result of very careful conditioning for years to get students to be that woefully and hopelessly ignorant of basic facts about modern American history, to not only mislead them into believing something that is patently false, but to be able to do so for years, despite the abundance of information around these kids to the contrary. How easy would it be for them to find any relevant source to learn that that is one of the most ridiculous things you could come to believe? And so my warning is that there is a tsunami of woke on the way. If you think that it's bad now, if you think that society is teetering on the edge of a collapse or some other social calamity because we have over-enthused 20-year-olds running around screaming about race and identity and demanding safe spaces and special treatment and given the ability to govern conversations with any adults that they have, and et cetera, that's nothing compared to what's on the way. You haven't seen anything yet. You're going to be shocked in a few years when you see the work that these people have done on these kids. It's absolutely appalling. The situation is much more alarming than it appeared on the news months ago, where we saw parents who were reacting to this kind of thing at school boards, and they were furious about it. Of course, the current administration, whoever is running it, quickly had the Justice Department intimidating and threatening parents at school boards that they were going to go after them for federal crimes because they were technically public officials, and so that was a felony. And so the FBI it's just astonishing, some of the things that they're now doing right to our face. It reminds me of that old expression about how do you boil a frog, and it's just the answer is very slowly, because if you drop it into the boiling water, it'll react and leap out immediately. But if you put it in lukewarm water, it'll sit there relaxed, and then you just gradually turn the heat up, and it will never notice until it's too late. And that's really where we are now. The water is boiling, and it certainly feels like it's too late when they're just blatantly lying right to your face. When you can have a transaction like Elon Musk buying Twitter, and then almost without a day going by, somehow the Department of Homeland Security has decided to ramp up this Department of Disinformation and hire this scatterbrained, cackling fool to run the agency and to police information. This is Nina Jankowicz, her name is. This is the same person who incidentally has been herself generating false tweets to support the idea that the Hunter Biden laptop, which by the way has been fully acknowledged by the New York Times, the Washington Post, and many other outlets, most all outlets that I know of, actually. And those aren't extreme right-wing news sources, by the way. They've all acknowledged the reality of the Hunter Biden laptop story, and that being the truth, which, of course, leads to the broader question. Why then, if the FBI has had possession of it since 2019, have they not acted? Do you suppose you or I would get that sort of courtesy if they came to our home and confiscated a laptop that they suspected to have criminal activity on, and immediately found records of shady investments that involved national security and foreign agents and crooked dealings? Do you suppose you would get the courtesy of 2.5 years of crickets while the media cheered for you? Probably not. You or I would probably go out in handcuffs with the laptop. And God help us once that happened, because we'd be likely to end up somewhere like the Washington, D.C. Bastille with the January 6th illegal paraders and trespassers who somehow have escaped the notice of the mass media and are not deserving of any constitutional rights, apparently. So there's that disaster, too. But when you see egregious acts like that, where they're suddenly creating this misinformation board to the day when the guy is purchasing Twitter because they're terrified that they're now going to lose control of the narrative, this is no longer a side that is concerned with maintaining an illusion of, oh, well, we're acting in best interest, this is all legitimate. It doesn't even matter anymore. I mean, they're parading an old man with dementia who cannot make it through a teleprompter read anymore, and that's the point of information that they feel is adequate for the American people. So that is how much respect they have for you right now, and that's just an indisputable fact. Turn on your television and have a look. So where do we go from here? Well, the road ahead does not look good. We cannot continue on with these two visions. I think one has to be destroyed. The notion of this postmodern America has to be destroyed. The lies have to be taken down. We could begin by destroying some of these nonsensical myths. Take, for example, the wage gap myth. How many times do we have to continue to hear that women only make 79 cents for every dollar a man makes, and all the nutty ideas that are extrapolated from that false notion? So it's technically true that the average wage of all women in the United States who work, compared to the average wage of all men in the United States who work, gives you a ratio of 79 cents to $1. That's true. The problem is that's all that's true. And you can extrapolate precisely nothing from that because it's not even a statistic. We don't have a single variable in that study. How many numbers of people were in each group? Did you compare 1 million women and 7 million men, or vice versa? How old were they? How long had they been working? Had they made advancements through the jobs? Had they worked in different fields? How long were they? There's just a million questions to answer. And so we have no idea what we're comparing, but because they have this blunt statistic that they can parade out that everyone immediately identifies with, in the same way that everyone believes that the letters A and R stand for assault rifle, which they don't. They stand for Armalite. It's simply the model of the gun that they made, and that was taken over by Washington attorneys and lobbyists and converted into the dirty word that conjures up the images of the dangerous weapon and the assault weapon. And this is just this has come to be something that they do. They regularly manipulate the language like this, and they know that if they can change the way you speak, they will change the way that you think, and if they change the way that you think, ultimately they will change the way that you behave. So I think that it's fair to say the left has gone awry here and definitely needs to be brought back on track. And hopefully the reasonable classic liberals will be able to do that. But this tumor on the left has to be extracted, because we can no longer continue selling this radical, poisonous idea of critical race theory in schools. And on top of that, to make matters worse, the gender ideology that is being imposed, or was attempted to be imposed in Florida. You'll recall House Bill 1557 that dealt with that. So the left, they want to go after kids, and they want them conditioned so that they will become loyal Democrats. We know that the human brain doesn't finish developing for about 20 years. So if you can get into it at some point prior to that, then you'll have a very easy time shaping it into what you want it to be. And then you will have the voter that you want in the end. And if you're not happy with the country because you think there are people that you'll never win over, then that's simple. You can just take the walls down and allow the flood of people to come in, and then you can replace the voters that you don't like with voters that you do like. It's a very obvious strategy, and it's very un-American, and it's time that it be called out for the radical strategy that it is. I don't want to have to sit through one more Senate hearing of that moron Alejandro Mayorkas sitting there. It's hard to tell if he's so ideologically intoxicated that he actually believes those insane statements that he makes, or if he just has the biggest set of balls in the place, and so he's just going to sit there in front of the cameras and say that. It's hard to tell which it is, but to see him respond to questions where he's created a disaster at the border, and his response is that he's more proud of the hard work that he's done down there, and he gives himself an A-, and it's just, to listen to it, it's unentertaining theater at this point, and you wonder why the Capitol Police haven't walked into the chamber and put him in handcuffs and taken him out. I mean, you cannot egregiously break the law and violate the Constitution like this. Of course, unless you're close to an election and the opposing party really would rather use this to get themselves elected rather than actually put a stop to it. And I think that's also the situation we find ourselves in. So don't have too much hope for when the shellacking occurs in November and the other side takes over, because it'll probably be 2 years of lame duck president, or I should say 2 additional years of lame duck president, and nonstop impeachments and that sort of thing, which ought to happen, but they're going to look like nothing but pure partisanship now. And because that trend was started in 2016 with the left and their insane impeachments, obsessing over Russia and Ukraine. And then it turns out that the current person in the White House had a son who was in Ukraine and had all these dirty dealings and worked for an oil company there. And now, surprise, surprise, we're in an oil crisis because Russia invaded Ukraine, and somehow we can't borrow enough money to give them state-of-the-art weapons to fight this. Why? Because we're such great allies with Ukraine historically, because they came to our aid in World War II, because they're a big trading partner. What's exactly the significance of Ukraine for the United States? Beyond and we shouldn't have to put the caveat in every statement that we've got to acknowledge it. Well, it's a democracy, sort of. And they're fighting off the aggressor. And so, this principled approach, principle. And yeah, to a point. But, when your weapons are sending Russian 20-year-olds home in body bags by the tens of thousands now, and estimates are somewhere between 10 and up to, believe it or not, up to 45,000 was the high estimate. I think that's astronomical and probably incorrect, but that's for the Center for International Studies. So that's the range, 10 to 45,000, and it doesn't take very long for the parades of kids coming home in body bags before you start to lose any public support that you may have had. Most Russian citizens were against this in the beginning. They did not support Putin. They largely still do not. They're embarrassed by it. But when you send American woke companies over there to go over and start scolding and punishing citizens and taking services away from them because they just want to be snotty and show how virtuous they are, and somehow they're going to punish Russians for this when the Russians themselves are not in favor of this war, to just throw that in the garbage and spit in their faces. We're doing this to a man who has the largest, or at least one of the largest nuclear stockpiles in the world. So it's probably not a good idea to continue backing him into a corner, humiliating him, stacking up his losses astronomical levels, and showing no sign of letting off. That's probably not the wisest strategy. It would be right up there with announcing the numbers of weapons that you're intending to send, how you're getting them in there, how much money you're going to borrow to buy more. That would be a really stupid thing to do, like the Department of Defense continues to do with this mannequin that comes out and reads from the teleprompter every once in a while. So I've certainly said enough. I'll stop there. That is my tale of two visions, to be continued. Catch up with you next time.